Hey, welcome. My name is Michael Levesque. I get the distinct honor of serving as the executive director for the Morehouse National Alumni Association. And we're so excited to have you all join us for this next installment in a series of high energy and mostly safe virtual discussions that we've hosted over the last several months. We all know how what an honor and privilege it is to be intimately connected to each other and this larger, diverse community of Morehouse men that are part of our brotherhood. And we know how much it is a privilege to be able to peaceably assemble to discuss important issues like voting in this upcoming election. So, thank you for spending some time with us today. During this homecoming season, we are forced to gather in a socially distanced and responsible manner, which we all are proud to do because we care. And I'm equally proud to turn the mic over to my good friend and brother, second term president of the Morehouse National Alumni Association, Marlon Cousin. Marlon?
Thank you, Mike. It is an honor and a pleasure to be president of the National Alumni Association from Morehouse College. Obviously, we're at a pivotal time in our election season. This is very important for our country. And to keep us on track and to keep us on time, we have Chuck Hobbs, who will be our moderator for this evening, an accomplished attorney. He's been at the forefront of activism around this political, not only locally and nationally, but I want to introduce you a friend of the association, Chuck Hobbs.
Thank you very much, President Cousin, as well as Brother Levesque. It is my pleasure to be here with you this evening, and we have a great show in store for you. We have a number of prominent Morehouse alumni who will weigh in on many of the pertinent topics that have been critical this year and as we wind down the election season. First up, we have Brother A. Scott Bolden, who is a prominent attorney in the Washington, D.C. area, also a political pundit as well. Good afternoon or good evening, Brother Bolden.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here.
We also have former Morehouse President Robert Franklin, who also is currently running for the 5th Congressional District seat in Georgia. Good afternoon, Brother Franklin.
Greetings. Welcome to all.
Okay. And last, we have Brother Bakari Sellers, who is a former state senator in South Carolina and currently is a CNN pundit that many of you see each and every day breaking down many of the issues. Good afternoon, Brother Sellers.
What's going on? I'm happy to be here with this August group. I'm happy to be here.
Glad to have you. Let's jump right in. First of all, I would like to talk about how important Morehouse College has been in each of your careers. So I'd like to go in alphabetical order. Brother Bolden, if you could take that question first, followed by Brother Franklin, and then Brother Sellers, if you could bring up the rear.
Well, I think me, like so many Morehouse men and the Morehouse men here, Morehouse was a training ground for leadership. My parents were civil rights activists, so I grew up in a civil rights household. My institutions in Chicago and outside of Chicago for several years. Morehouse was a punctuation mark based on everything I learned from my family in training me not only to believe in myself, but to be fearless in what I was facing post Morehouse. Went to Howard's Law School, which was another punctuation mark, the bedrock for civil rights. And then I've spent 30 years at a large international law firm, upon which I'm a managing partner for one of their most important offices. And so Morehouse contributed all of that to be fearless, but also to be aggressive. And as Dr. Gloucester would always say, you're not here to get your degree, you're here to change the world, or you're part of the world. And I've tried to do that over the last 3 or 4 decades since leaving Morehouse.
Thank you, Brother Bolden. Brother Franklin?
Yes, thank you, Brother Host. And I'm so honored to be in the presence of my dear friends, Brother Bolden and Brother Sellers, these extraordinary national, international pundits and public intellectuals. I would say that Morehouse College has had an extraordinary impact on my sense of my own personal mission statement in life and my expectations. recall how leaders like Benjamin Mays and Howard Thurman and Martin King and Dr. Massey and Gloucester, so many of them talked about, you don't have a right to die until you've done something to improve humanity. And that's part of the ethos that we live with, the restlessness that lives inside the heart of every Morehouse man, every man of Morehouse. And one of the things that really drove me during my privileged time to serve as president was to craft a simple vision of what Morehouse tries to instill in raising the bar for every student and every alumnus. And that's where you get the notion of the 5 wells. Most of you know, but I'll just recite for those who don't know, that every Morehouse man should aspire to be well-read, well-spoken, well-traveled, well-dressed, and well-balanced. And that's just the foundation for leadership and responsible citizenship. And from there, we seek to bring those perspectives to bear on promoting justice, promoting restorative justice for a community that has been historically oppressed. So in any walk of life, we're working on restorative justice, from science to the arts. And then finally, we seek to lift as we climb, that wonderful adage offered by Anna Julia Cooper, the 19th century feminist or womanist leader. As you rise, lift others with you. That's at the heart of Et Facta Est Lux. Then there was light.
Well said, Brother Franklin. Last, Brother Sellers, what impact has Morehouse College had on your career, brother?
You know, being one of the younger members on the panel today, I just find it, my heart is so warm. But I always recognize, and even today, probably greater so, the responsibility that comes with being a Morehouse man. So I'm in a business on CNN where there aren't many people of color. You got Van Jones and Angela Rye. You got Don Lemon, Andrew Gillum. And I begin to struggle to think about many more names. And so I say that to say that I go out understanding that every time I open my mouth, I'm representative of what it is to be Black in America. I'm representative, and I say with all humility, I'm representative of our culture, because when people see me on TV, that's usually how they see us. And particularly, that's how they see Black men in America. Morehouse prepared me for that. Morehouse prepared me for that awesome responsibility, placing a crown above our head that we must grow into. My family, like Brother Bolden stated, my family came from a civil rights tradition as well. Mm-hmm. My mom was a part of the desegregating class of Hamilton High School in Memphis, Tennessee. And of course, my father was a member of SNCC, National Field Director, mm-hmm. under both John Lewis and Stokely Carmichael. My son is named Stokely after Stokely Carmichael. And so I understand that tradition, and my parents gave me these amazing choices in life, and one of which was you can go to any college you want to go to in the entire world, but it must be an HBCU. Mm-hmm. And Morehouse was a school that my brother and I found to be home. The relationships that we made there are the greatest currency I own in this world. And even more importantly, it gave me this awesome responsibility and task not to let down those individuals like the men on this panel and all of those names who've come before in the daily work that I do. So every day I go out into the world, I want to represent our people. I want to be unapologetically Black. I want to be forever speaking my truth to power, but I also want the men of Morehouse to be extremely proud of the work that I do.
And indeed we are. Gentlemen, let's jump right in. With 24 days left until Election Day, how should we as Morehouse men engage Black men across the country who simply do not see any benefit in voting this fall? Who would like to go first?
Well, let me begin by simply saying, because I feel a certain urgency as a current candidate, mm-hmm. and I would like to say that as I move from the office of president into a professorial role, serving the community in a variety of ways. I really felt a call on July 17 as John Lewis passed away, passed into eternity. Many of you viewing also are aware that it was the same day that the Reverend C.T. Vivian also crossed into eternity. And the call to service in a different kind of way. So I've been a public servant. I've worked in various roles as a program officer at the Ford Foundation. Already had the best job in the world as president of Morehouse College. Been teaching. I've produced 4 books, but this was felt urgent that we need leaders, as Benjamin Mays and Martin King called for, who really represent public service and not seeking self-aggrandizement. And so my message to our brothers who are thinking, maybe we'll sit this general election out and then our local 5th district in Atlanta, December 1st runoff election for John Lewis's seat. I think it's absolutely critical to remember the sacrifices, the blood, the sweat, the tears, the concussions that John Lewis and other leaders endured in order to purchase your right to vote. So you have a moral obligation to be up and about, vote early, and then urge others to vote. Figure out your plan, absentee vote, whatever it is, you have an obligation to the ancestors to vote. And Morehouse says there are no excuses for not voting in this high stakes election.
I want to take President Franklin's words and pin them and say they are true and very valuable. But I also want to go one step further that, for example, our brother Shaq yesterday recently just stated that he's 48 years old and just voted for the first time. Now, there's a certain level of privilege that goes with that, I must admit. However, that there are a certain group of men, particularly young men, that when we say accurately so, as President Franklin laid out, the history and the cost for the right to vote, that ain't enough for them. So I actually challenge all of us to begin a process of listening to our brothers and understanding why they feel as if the Democratic Party and the Republican Party both have passed them by, and understand why they feel like government does not work for them. And then instead of telling them who the enemy is, which they know better than most, give them a reason to vote for us. I think for far too long, we've been talking at people and talking by people, but not listening to people. And I think Black men are the largest group of swing voters we have in this country and one of the most consequential elections we have. And we have to treat them as such, which means listening, messaging to them. And at the end of the day, treating them like we treat every other group of swing voters, whether it be suburban white women or what have you. We have to pay that price and begin to pay attention to Black men, because if we do not, people oftentimes think that this is an election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. It is not. This election is between Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and the couch. And there are many people who choose the couch. And until we begin to listen, I think that still will be a factor that plays into our elections, no matter how urgent or consequential they may be.
Indeed. Brother Bolden, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with Bakari and the good doctor. This is one of the most frustrating things for me as someone who's been a state party chair, someone who writes a lot of checks to Democratic candidates. The fact that Black men don't vote. And I think Bakari is right about having to listen and stop talking by and through people. But at the same time, the choices are very clear. Share 2 quick stories. I was having dinner with a former NFL football player and his wife. I represent both of them. And he announced that he was not voting. He was going to sit this out. And he said that it was just a lot of noise from both sides. He didn't know who to believe. He didn't know what to do. And I retraced the history of how important voting is. And then I talked about the stark choices for the future of this country and that what it meant for Black people, let alone Black men. And once I listened to him, and then I shared, and It was actually a very thoughtful conversation. And I ended with the fact that you certainly don't support Trump. He said no. I said, but many of those who sat out the race in 2016 delivered Donald Trump. A vote or non-vote or no vote for Hillary Clinton was a vote for Trump. And you've seen the chaos in every corner of our body politic and economy and the laws of this country being violated. I said, if you sit out, you certainly are going to contribute to him voting, because the GOP's approach and Donald Trump's approach is voter suppression. The Democrats are running not just against Donald Trump and the GOP, but they're running against Russian interference, and they're running against voter suppression and banking on you and betting on you, someone who's educated and wealthy, to not vote. I said, we cannot let that happen. I believe I convinced him to vote. His wife was certainly going to vote. And then I want to share one last story about 2016. After Donald Trump won on November 3rd, there was a janitor in my building, and he stopped me because he knows I was very active in Democratic politics. And he said, you know, Mr. Bolden, I voted for Donald Trump yesterday. And I looked at him as if he were crazy, and I said, you did? He said, I did. He said, listen, illegal immigrants came and took my construction job. They were cheaper labor, and that's why I'm pushing this mop right now. And nobody from the Democratic Party spoke to me. And as a result, I just thought I'd take a chance on Donald Trump. I said that his racism and his racist offensive statements did not bother you. And he said to me in a clear voice and clear-eyed and said, I've been called the N-word before, and I'm still pushing this mop. I think we've got to focus on African-American men, jobs, entrepreneurship, but get to that very issue of that 68-year-old janitor who lost his job to illegal immigrants and stuff. That messaging, we got to counter that message to them and make sure that there's only one clear choice, and that is to vote the Democratic ticket. So those are my best thoughts on that subject.
Absolutely. Dr. Franklin, let me ask you this, brother, with regards to the youth vote. And later on in the show, we're going to talk a little bit about the youth outreach as well as the.
Can I cut you off for
Sure.
1 second? Let me cut you off for 1 quick second, because Brother Bolden was talking about all them checks he be writing, but I don't know. Did he write you a check yet, Brother Franklin? Because if not, we need to make sure that check hit. Maybe it's lost in the mail, but I'm your best fundraiser.
You have stepped into it now, Picard. I've written 2 or 3. If
He
you want
has-
more, you need to ask
I'm
for
just
more.
making sure. I'm your best fundraiser.
Brother Sellers, I love you. That's the Morehouse Brotherhood at work. Thank you for looking out for a brother. And Brother Bolden has shown up more than once, and I'm very grateful.
And now I'm going to have to write another one.
Michael,
Amen.
I am excited with respect to the youth vote to see how young sisters and brothers in the streets, how Black Lives Matter and other galvanizing movements are rhetorically and actually moving from marching in the streets, protesting police misconduct and an entire criminal justice system that is profoundly flawed, although it works according to its rules to exclude and oppress people of color and poor people. But the sisters and brothers are energized. Look at our Spelman alumnus, Sister Stacey Abrams. Look at all the powerful leaders emerging in this Georgia U.S. Senate race with Raphael Warnock, Morehouse man, and so many others. So I hope HBCUs around the nation will mobilize their alumni, their current student bodies. I hear a lot of positivity about young people who want to translate the protests into the polls. And I also want to shout out some of the artists who are doing powerful work in Atlanta, Brother T.I. and Brother Mike. I mean, it's all sorts of artists are trying to mobilize because they have the ear of so many young people.
Indeed. Brothers, I want to raise a topic that has vexed me this entire year, and that is what specifically in August when Senator Kamala Harris made her historic, was nominated to be the Democratic vice presidential nominee and accepted it at the convention this past August. One of the things that I have noticed both during her initial presidential candidacy and definitely once she was tapped to be on the Democratic ticket, is the rank misogyny that I see. I expected it from the right. I have been profoundly disappointed for almost 2 years now in the conversation from the left, particularly from brothers who consider themselves to be woke, enlightened, but they are masquerading their whole conversation about her policies, so to speak, often are tinged with misogyny. Brothers, how do we push back against that with 3 weeks later? With 3 weeks, hold on, let me say this again because I know we can edit. Brothers, how do we push back against the misogyny that we are seeing among a number of brothers on social media and within the comments on traditional media articles?
Let me take that. I am somebody who is very, very close to Senator Harris. Spent a lot of time with her before the debate. I talked to her regularly and was a national co-chair for her presidential campaign. We talk on the weekends a lot when she's back when she wasn't vice president. We would talk on Saturdays and Sundays when she was doing her chores around the house. And, my kids refer to her as Auntie Kamala. This is a conversation that we have to have amongst ourselves and within our community, because it's not only prevalent now, but it was also prevalent in the election of Hillary Clinton. But more so, it's disappointing because you see people literally, as Brother Bolden kind of alluded to, but we see brothers sometimes envelop themselves in Russian talking points and become human bots and trolls themselves. With the disinformation and misinformation. Now, her record's not perfect, and she'll be the first one to tell you that. But I think that if you are to look at her through the light and through a lens that is a fair comparison, then she is head and shoulders better than the alternative. It's so wild that we hold this Black woman up to a standard that we wouldn't hold ourselves to, that we don't hold anybody else up to. But somehow, some way, people want to, I don't know what the end game is with this distortion and unrealistic criticism of Senator Harris. But we have to have an internal conversation, and it must stop.
Yeah, what bothers me most about it is not it's not just the misogyny from the Republican side. I mean, we have the President of the United States calling her a monster, which is a bizarre comment, period. I was on Fox the other night, and Reverend Daryl Scott said she was Hillary Clinton in blackface, which was just beyond me and bizarre. Even Laura Ingraham said, "What do you mean by that?" or "Why are you saying that?" The rules are different, though, still in America in regard to female candidates, let alone Black female candidates. I saw on that debate with Pence, Kamala restraining herself. I've known her for 30 plus years. We were in college together. I'm not great friends with her, but I've certainly followed her career. But she was restrained because the rules for her engagement were that she could not come off as an angry Black woman. Why couldn't she come off as a forceful woman politician running for vice president and just happen to be a Black woman, as opposed to her being a Black vice presidential nominee or candidate? And so I do think the work has to be done internally, not only within Black folks, but in general in this country. And let me tell you something about Black prosecutors, right? I'm a former Black prosecutor from New York City. African-American men and women, and in our communities of color, better be glad, for the most part, that you have Black prosecutors who are committed to the cause and committed to their community. If they're not, then certainly they fit a different mold. But as a prosecutor, I was able to do awesome things as opposed to putting people in jail, getting them getting them programs, getting them help, if you will. And those who didn't deserve it, if you will, or were career criminals, sure, you have to prosecute them. But what I brought to the table was a sensitivity to the social, economic, and cultural differences and the challenges of racism in our poor communities. And that matters when you have huge discretion as a prosecutor. So Kamala may not be perfect, but I will say this: you have a snippet of the information she was dealing with as an AG, a state AG, as well as a state's attorney. You have a snippet of it regarding her discretionary decisions in regard to African Americans that she was dealing with and prosecuting. So we ought to be careful when we judge, because there's so much more than what the media gives us that goes into that discretionary decision making as a prosecutor.
Brother Bolden, I agree with you on that. I, too, was a former state level prosecutor, and I have found it to be bizarre that so many brothers and sisters, I believe Brother Sellers said it best, have become flesh bots, so to speak, when they're talking about the idea of prosecutors or being the police and being against Black people, because the majority of the cases I handled as a prosecutor, we all understand that crime is intraracial. The victims of those crimes, when I prosecuted young Black men and young Black women, were Black people, 9 times out of 10.
Exactly.
So with that, we have to make sure that all of our people are protected from crime, while also, Brother Bolden, as you say, make sure that we're wise and judicious in how justice is meted out. Brother Franklin, what are your thoughts with regards to the misogyny that we are seeing thrown at Kamala Harris, and as Brother Sellers also said, 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton, and many female candidates across the country?
I'm so grateful that you raised this question. It says a lot about you and about the quality of this program that you would highlight this issue. And one of the things that I would say is that we need to transform this era of toxic masculinity, of men thinking they are in charge and must be in charge and putting down others, to move from toxic masculinity to a transformed and transforming masculinity. In other words, every one of us who are men in a patriarchal culture that distributes power and privilege on the basis of gender as well as race, we have to stand up for our sisters, for all women, for their protection, for their rights, for their full equal employment, etc. And so let's not forget that this is the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment that provided the right to vote for white women, and the 55th anniversary of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, for which Ella Baker and Diane Nash and Marian Wright Edelman and so many sisters were on the front line with SNCC and other organizations leading advocacy. So men have to be moral exemplars. We have to speak up. We have to break the silence when we hear or see other brothers misbehaving in relation to our sisters. We have to say, no, brother, we are lifting a higher standard. And the final thing I would say, even as we talk about the privileges we have, though they may be relative as men, we also need to be self-critical and hold each other accountable for bias against the LGBTQ community. So here we are in October, which is Pride Month. And we have to also speak, those of us who are straight, speak up for and protect those who are victims of homophobia and transphobia.
Amen. Brothers,
Amen.
The coronavirus pandemic has totally impacted every facet of America this year, the world, actually. Many of us on this program, if not all of us, know someone who has either been infected or died from the disease. And yet, if you had told me in February and March, when the disease started to really take over the national conversation, that there would be a hyper-politicization of mask wearing and social distancing, I wouldn't have believed it. But here we are. We have a Republican Party that, for the most part, scoffs at mask wearing and do not believe in social distancing. On the other hand, we've got a Democratic Party that does. With that in mind, how do you grade the Trump administration's handling of the coronavirus pandemic this year? Who would like to go first?
It's an F, but I don't think that's the biggest problem.
Okay.
So I think what the coronavirus has done is taking the Band-Aid off the systemic inequities we have in our own communities. People have to go back and ask themselves, why are Black folk dying at a higher rate? And why are we dying at a disproportionate rate? And why are we being affected at a greater rate than our white colleagues? And the answer is simple, that when you have these environmental injustices where you're breathing in unhealthy air and drinking unclean water, when you live in food deserts, when you don't have access to, fresh fruits and vegetables, when you don't have access to quality care because your rural hospitals are shutting down and closing, or your states didn't expand Medicaid. When you overlay a pandemic, it's no question as to why you're dying at higher rates. And I think that we have to address these underlying systemic issues. I mean, Donald Trump ain't gonna do it. We know that, and we know that he's exacerbating the problem. But now that our eyes have been opened to the fact that these things, and we all know these things, but now that the country's eyes have been open to these underlying systemic inequities, we have to come up with, and one of the things I'm sure Congressman Franklin will do as I speak it into existence, one of the things we have to do is come up with policy specific or race specific policies that deal with race specific issues. And until we do that, until we get out of the mind state of rising tides lifting all boats, we're going to continue to have these issues.
Well said, Brother Sellers. Brother Bolden, what are your thoughts about the coronavirus pandemic and the Trump administration's handling of that in 2020?
Well, I mean, it's obviously an F, and I think Bakari is right about these underlying systemic issues that have to be addressed and will be addressed, I think, by a Biden administration. It is a bizarre, 1 out of every 1,000 Black people in this country have contracted the coronavirus. And what's frustrating to me is how the GOP and Donald Trump can turn a health issue, a science issue, a pathogen into a cultural war. And you wonder why we've got 215,000 people dead and 7 to 8 million people who've contracted the disease, far more than any other industrialized country. It's really clear that negative narrative is driven by the Republicans for some bizarre reason that makes absolutely no sense and puts their own health at risk. It is beyond bizarre. It's illogical that you would have a mixed message. You have the scientists and Dr. Fauci saying this pathogen is dangerous. You've got people dying. You've got millions of people around the world who've contracted it and had long-term disabilities because of it. And you have a political party in the greatest country in the world downplaying it, saying we've got it under control, we've got the supplies, it won't kill you, it won't hurt you, we're moving on, we're turning the corner. And then the White House itself becomes a super spreader of the pathogen. And 24 people and the president contracted. And the doctors, the GOP Senate and the House, they don't want to wear masks, they don't want to social distance. You've seen the pictures, to their own detriment, physical health detriment, that they would still not follow science or the rules of the CDC. Something's unstable. Something's mentally unstable about that. It's like the signifying monkey, the old African folklore, where the monkey is Donald Trump. He slips off the branch twice, and the pathogen, right, who knows no politics, doesn't care who you are, has invaded the White House. And the lion kills the monkey. The pathogen is the lion. And I don't wish death on anyone, but what I'm saying is, from that folklore, the signifying monkey caught its just due. And so something's really, really wrong beyond politics, is really, really wrong with the psychology of the GOP, Donald Trump, and the 40% of Americans who really believe in his leadership, almost cult-like. And so we're going to have a struggle. This election is going to be about COVID's impact on business, as well as healthcare. And every American is going to be affected by this. And if there's no greater reason to vote the Democratic ticket, what I just described is more than enough. When kids aren't in school, businesses are shut down, and the impact is double on African American businesses and individuals and so forth and so on. And so I can't say enough about it, but I got to tell you, psychologically, I'm deeply troubled by how this pathogen has spread because of the inconsistent messages and the confusion caused by the White House. That's just really, really a bad situation.
Brother Bolden, I'm right there with you. And again, I pay public respects to our Morehouse brother, Herman Cain, a Republican. I did not agree with him on 99.99% of his politics. But at the same time, I was saddened this summer when he succumbed to the coronavirus, a disease that he could have prevented also by wearing a mask at that rally that Donald Trump held in Tulsa back in June. With that, Dr. Franklin.
That is a great example. Yeah.
Right.
That is a great example.
It's mind-boggling.
He was suffering from cancer. And I knew Herman. Herman and I would do debates on conservative TV networks. And he was a good person. We didn't agree with his politics, but he was fighting cancer and still went to this rally. I apologize for interrupting you.
No, it's okay, brother. Dr. Franklin, go ahead.
Yeah, if I might jump in, I just want to say my two distinguished brothers have given the grades of F. And now, since I'm the only one who's been a college president, I want to take a slightly different perspective. After you get a certain number of Fs, there are consequences to that. And that means you get suspended. So I really want to declare, and really summing up what Bakari and Scott just said, we need to expel this president. He is overdue. All of his probation has run out. He has failed miserably, and hundreds of thousands of lives will be paid for this man's failure. The next point is, let's not forget the fundamentals that we are in charge of. We know this government is incompetent. They delayed, they denied, they continue to do so. But there are those the big 5 things we can do. Wear your mask, watch your distance, wash your hands, those 3 W's, right? But also clean surfaces and ensure proper ventilation in your household, in your office. Those are things we can do, we must do for ourselves and the health of our villages. And then the final point I would make is, if I am elected on December 1st in this runoff in the 5th Congressional District, and by the way, I think it would be pretty cool to send a former HBCU president to Congress. I think it's only happened one other time. Bakari, you can correct me if you know of another, but Floyd Flake, who was president of Wilberforce. Morehouse, AU Center, I'm calling on you. Let's make this happen locally. But the 3 pieces of legislation I would prioritize in terms of messaging, convening leaders, and certainly putting pressure on Mitch McConnell and this corrupt GOP Senate is, number 1, to pass a robust HEROES Act, a COVID relief to provide relief. State and local governments have been devastated by the loss of tax revenues. We need to ensure that small businesses have the support, and not just the big box stores and big box restaurants that get all the money. Secondly is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, to create a new culture of accountability in law enforcement throughout the nation. And then finally, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So those 3 bills would be my priorities during that time of service.
That's outstanding. And Brother Franklin, with that, recognizing that Brother Sellers is going to have to leave us soon, Bakari, I want to ask you this. This year, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, as Brother Franklin just mentioned, Ahmaud Arbery, Rashard Brooks, so many names. It seems like hardly a week goes by without another hashtag being created where we are seeking justice for another Black man, woman, or child who was unarmed and killed by law enforcement. With that, there also has sprung up this year the defund the police slogan. Some people say that goes too far. Some people say that it is not enough. What does police reform, or what should police reform, Brother Sellers, look like across America so that we can stop these extrajudicial killings that continue to happen day in and day out?
So that's a great question, and I'm glad that you asked it. I get so frustrated when some of my friends and mentors, people like Jim Clyburn, somewhat pervert what defund the police truly means. Defund the police is a horrible, awful communication slogan. The Democrats, we oftentimes do come up with some of the worst. We need to hire better comms people. That would be my suggestion. But defund the police doesn't mean that when you dial 911, police won't be showing up. Police are still coming. But the truth of the matter is, we're trying to reimagine what law enforcement looks like. I mean, we all have law enforcement in our family. I appreciated you guys' sentiment and comments as a criminal defense lawyer. I appreciate everything you said, because the most powerful person in the room is the prosecutor.
Yes.
But we all know law enforcement. We all have law enforcement in our families or are friends with them. And many of them will even tell you that a lot of the times they get called out, it should be a mental health professional, not themselves. So when we say reimagining police, we're talking about taking these bloated police budgets that we see in a lot of major cities. In cities like Los Angeles, California, we know that the police budget is over 50% of the budget, and reappropriate some of those dollars to mental health, reappropriate some of those dollars to children, youth programs during the summers, summer jobs programs like Marion Barry had in Washington, D.C., ensuring that we have guidance counselors in schools, just making communities whole. But you asked me very tangibly, what would I do to stop these extrajudicial killings? I think it's one thing to ban chokeholds. That sounds cute, right? But chokeholds have been banned in New York since 1990. It was still used on Eric Gardner. So it's not necessarily the banning of the chokeholds, although I do wish every city would do so. But it's more so the accountability or lack thereof of law enforcement. So how do we do that? We need a nationwide database of bad officers, because right now, if you beat somebody's ass in Atlanta, Georgia, you can go down to, Austell or Columbus and become chief of police, because there's no database that prevents that from happening. So we need that first. Second, we need a nationalized standard for use of force, so that we know what individuals are being trained. We know how they're being trained, and there is a standard that they have to hold themselves to under that training. The third thing is we need to limit qualified immunity. And no one is trying to necessarily break a police officer in the civil justice sense. But what we are trying to say that Derek Chauvin had, I believe, 13 prior cases, and many of them ended in settlements. But they will continue the same behavior if there is no deterrent, and limiting qualified immunity provides some level of deterrent. And the last thing we have to do is lower the standard whereby we can charge federal civil rights crimes against law enforcement officers who commit heinous acts. Again, going back to the Eric Gardner case, I will quote my good friend Eric Holder, who as Attorney General couldn't prosecute the officer who choked out Eric Gardner till he died. And the first time we said, "I can't breathe." And his exact quote was, "The standard is too damn high, and we need to lower that standard." Look, I don't believe that this is new, and I don't believe that somehow it's a greater number than it was before. We're just seeing it more with the advent with the of the camera phone. We're able to see Black bodies and Black death, and it's become porn for America to see Black bodies in the street, and so we're able to see it more now. And unfortunately, that puts us in what I call a perpetual state of grieving.
Brother Sellers, let me ask you one last question before you go real quickly. Earlier this week, we saw where 10 white males were arrested by the FBI for a plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. Obviously, we talk about Jim Crow 2.0 and the fact that there's unequal justice in America. More pertinently, are you fearful, or do you think that we are teetering on the brink of a second civil war here in America, depending upon the outcome of the election in 3 weeks? And I'm going to come back to Brothers Franklin and Bolden with that same question, but I want to make sure we get Brother Sellers' answer before he has to go to another engagement.
So, no, we're not teetering on another civil war. I don't believe. But I will say that some white folks going crazy. Protect yourself. I had to put what they call a law enforcement calls a net around my family probably about a month ago, after I got off TV with Rick Santorum one morning. A 61-year-old white guy from West Palm Beach, who is a registered Republican voter, called my wife's business and threatened to kill me, and named a street, not the street I live on, but about 2 or 3 streets over. So it was close enough that it raised some alarms. And, I wasn't nervous. My wife was extremely frantic, and watching your family go through that is just terrible. I think that this highlights the two systems of justice, or one system of justice, one system of injustice we have in this country. I think that racism has always been here, but Donald Trump is, poured gasoline on a fire. And I'm not worried about, a lot of people are worried about, will he leave? Will he leave? Will he leave? Will there be people in the streets? And I'm not someone who thinks like that, because none of this matters unless you beat them. So, for me, I'm laser focused on the next 20 some odd days to get to this election day and beating him soundly. And then we'll worry about what's next. But I encourage all my brethren to be extremely safe. And I just want to say thank you for having one of the richest panels and most, this is a panel, substantive panels that I've been a part of in a very long time. And this is should be expected from Morehouse College. And I'm grateful to be a part of it.
Thank you so much for coming this morning. Godspeed, Brother Sellers.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. With that, Dr. Franklin, Brother Bolden, I'd like for you to weigh in. That was a two-part question that Brother Sellers just handled. One is, what does justice look like when we talk about defunding the police reform? How should it look? And the other, when we're dealing with the fact that the FBI continues to say, no matter how much Fox News or the president may indicate that Antifa or Black Lives Matter poses a great threat to America, the FBI has consistently, as has the Southern Poverty Law Center, indicated that white supremacy continues to remains the main impetus for violence or focus of violence in this country. I'd like for you all to answer both. Whichever one of you brothers wants to jump in first, go right ahead.
After you, Scott.
Brother Bo.
Republicans and
okay, I'm sorry.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That's political rhetoric you hear from the GOP and Donald Trump and Fox News. That's not the political reality. Let me talk a little bit about, as a former prosecutor, I agree with Bakari on every one of those initiatives, but I would offer a friendly amendment that we've got to look at who we're giving guns to and who we're making police officers. You get a gun, you get a badge, and you get the American flag. And when you shoot and murder and kill Black men and women because you are fearful of them, whether they're running away from you, whether they're struggling with you, you see the police around the country. You saw it in the Floyd protests in Boston and in Milwaukee and all over the country, the police using force, sometimes deadly force, was the order of the day. There was no de-escalation. There was no de-escalation. And so we've got to look at who we're giving police, who we're giving guns and badges to, how we're training them, and how they are processing their training. If you look at the majority of these videos, and I've looked at them repeatedly over time, the police use deadly force or believe they can use deadly force to obtain compliance from these defendants, from these people or individuals who they want to arrest. They beat them, they shoot them. It makes absolutely no sense. They shot Philander Castile in his car when he was narrating what he was doing because this officer was unqualified. Not letting them off the hook, but they were unqualified to even be a police officer. We've got to look at training. We've got to look at psychological analysis and assessment. Are you more likely to be racist or not? Are you more likely to escalate versus de-escalate? And there are psychological examinations out there that would tell a police training module whether this individual should have a gun, should not have a gun, should have a badge, or should not have a badge. Because when I look at those videos, once the shooting begins or the death becomes real, I say, what you shooting for? My goodness, what did you do that for? It is shocking. And so most of the time, it's because they find the arrestee, to not be cooperating. That doesn't mean you can go use deadly force. You got to figure out another way as a community leader. The police are community leaders, if you will, to de-escalate this. So we really got to look at this training. Secondly, we got way too many police departments. Thirdly, the minimum education requirement in some cases is high school. Other cases, it's college, but it's uneven. We need a national standard for that. And so I would supplement Bacardi's statement with those two additions, because what I see in those videos are completely unqualified police officers, and they may be racist, but black and white police officers abuse people in the community. It's a blue issue. It's not a black or white issue.
Amen.
You know, I can imagine that there are days when Barack Obama and Michelle and Eric Holder wake up and scratch their heads and say, didn't we already provide a blueprint? We worked on this.
Exactly.
Recommendations. Why aren't we going to revisit those recommendations? And so much of what Scott just brilliantly outlined and Bakari outlined is covered in both the current legislation on Justice and Policing Act, but also in the 21st Century Policing Report. For those of you who haven't seen that, Google that and look at what President Obama did with that 21st Century Policing recommendations, because many of them have still not been embraced by law enforcement around the nation. I would simply add, I don't think I heard mentioned, ensuring that all police officers are wearing body cams, because we learned so much from the presence of physical evidence of what went down. And that's one of the tragedies in the Breonna Taylor case. The other point I would make, because I think it's all been said, is the importance of understanding, and this speaks, Michael, to your point about what is the nature of this political moment, this zeitgeist. Dr. King used to use that word a lot, zeitgeist. He probably learned it in Morehouse. Zeit is the German word for time, and Geist, the word for spirit. What is the spirit of this time? And you're right, it feels like we are inching toward those days in 1860, 1861, when the Civil War kicked off. But I agree with Bakar. I don't think we are there. I think that institutions, I think people's sense of decency and wrongdoing will kick in a significant way. We are not going there. A lot of these crazy folk with weapons are going to be arrested. I'm glad they're now public. We know who they are, where they are. We're tracking these people and photos and so on. So I think that this issue will get managed with new administration, a new Justice Department, a real Attorney General. I hope Scott Bolton is on the short list for Attorney General. We need this kind of leadership. And finally, we need to recognize the culture of fear and grievance. That's so much what drives white male politics today, fear and grievance. That's what drove the Civil War. Slaveholding states felt they were being disenfranchised, appalled that they would talk about black men and women voting. But Dr. King ended one of his sermons, as I'll conclude, by saying that whenever you see fear coming, remember that fear one night knocked on your door and faith answered, and there was no one there.
Amen.
Yeah. Hey, Charles, if I may,
brother.
real quick.
Sure.
The white nationalist movement has always been with us. It's not going away. Part of that 40% are white nationalists. It ought to be illegal to be a white nationalist in this country, just like it ought to be illegal to be in a violent gang, a motorcycle gang, or even community gang, if you will. But it's always been here. What you're seeing and feeling and hearing is that it's gone mainstream because of the political rhetoric of the Trump administration and Trump himself. If you compare what he says about stand back and stand by to the Proud Boys, if you look at both sides in Charleston, a white woman was killed a few years ago fighting Nazis in the streets of Charlottesville. Think about that. That element has always been there, but he's brought it mainstream to the point where when he denies being a racist, I'm always saying when I do speak on it, I always say that can't be true because the racists think you're a racist. They endorse your rhetoric. It's out of their playbook, if you will. So he's brought it mainstream and been an enabler, if you will. And so I get negative comments when I do Fox News. I get called the N-word. Every once in a while, like Bakari said, I have to send some of that stuff that's very specific to Reed Smith Security. But let me tell you something. I came from a strong neighborhood. You know, if you sold wolf tickets, we didn't really worry about you. So if you're going to send me stuff anonymously and call me the N word repeatedly, yeah, I'm not worried about you. But I am worried about the person who doesn't send me that text. And that's who we got to find and defend ourselves against. And there are plenty of them out there. So thank you for letting me jump in.
No doubt. And brothers, this has been a riveting conversation this morning. Reminds me of being back in Shivers Dining Hall or any of the other locations on campus where we'll come together and talk about the pertinent issues of the day. With that, I'd like to bring back in President Cousin as well as Brother Levesque as we begin to get to a close. And with that, I'd like for each person to go ahead and give a closing statement here as we come to a conclusion. Starting with you, President Emeritus Franklin.
Thank you very much, Michael, and to Chuck and President Cousins and all of you on the panel, my dear friend Scott and Bakari, all of you who are viewing. This is an extraordinary moment in history. 100 years from today, people will look back and say, what was it like? What was it like to be there during those extraordinary times that are reading about now in history books? Now is the time to show up. Now is the time for the best of the Morehouse, Spelman, our HBCU national ethos of intellectual excellence, of integrity, of moral leadership, and of service to the community, and above all, lifting others as we climb. No wonder Marcus Garvey would electrify Harlem when he would look at the power of the people there. And the people didn't realize they had more power than they really had. He said, you all must vote. You must organize. You must support Black businesses. And then he would look at them and say, up, you mighty people. You can accomplish what you will.
That's right. That's
Amen.
right.
Hey, Brother Bolden.
Hey, Charles, I did not hear your question. Forgive me.
Oh, no, sure. Basically, I wanted to go ahead and just close on out and give your final statements here as we come to a conclusion.
Well, we're certainly at a consequential time and a consequential election, and we have to be vigilant. But if there's the one thing that I would tell our Morehouse brothers out here who listen to this, and even non-HBCU folks, is that what are you going to do on November 3rd or leading up to November 3rd to change your life, to change America? It's in our hands. What are you going to do? And while I hear about the lawsuits that are going to be filed and Lawyers Civil Rights, the Lawyers Civil Rights Committee has been filing and doing an incredible job. I hear about people registering to vote. I hear the message of vote, vote, vote. But we got to do more than that. And the one thing you don't hear us talk about that I'm doing and working with organizations on is getting people to the poll. DC, you knock on their door, you grab them, and you take them to the polls, or you sit them and fill out their mail-in ballot, because nothing else really matters unless your vote is counted. And the only way your vote's going to be counted is if you mail in that ballot the right way. And then secondly, or you go early vote, which I'm a big proponent of. Go early vote to the polls. It's not packed. You can avoid lines, and it takes you 5 minutes in most jurisdictions. But get to the polls and get people to the polls, not just one person, but take 5 people. My good friend and client Earthquake has a program where he is reaching out across America and telling Black people to commit to taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new voters, not vote people who voted in the past, but new voters who normally would not vote but are qualified. And so we got to stay vigilant. Take somebody to the polls. Don't just tell me to vote. Take somebody to the polls. Because again, remember what you're running against. You're running against Donald Trump and the GOP, some political gangsters, some true political gangsters. You're running against Russian interference. That's been confirmed, and the GOP wants to ignore that. And then you're voting against voter suppression. You're running against voter suppression, which is prevalent not only in the South, but in the North and the East, as well as the West. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Charles. It's great to get together with Morehouse men, and I've really learned a great deal from this discussion. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And again, I also want to thank President Cousin as well as Brother Levesque for allowing me the opportunity to serve as your moderator this morning. And I hope that we can come together very soon and do this again. With that, I will turn it back over to President Cousin.
All I can say is simply, wow. When you talk about real conversation, what's going on in our country, this panel was outstanding. Thank you, A. Scott Bolden, Dr. Franklin, Bakari Sellers. Thank you, brothers. Morehouse steps up again and do it like we do it. I also want to thank Smogo Media, which is a Morehouse alum as well. Kirk and Joel and his team did a fantastic job bringing this to you. So we're excited about that. And so the Morehouse College Alumni Association want to be prevalent in your life. We're not going to stop producing these type of programs to make sure we add and multiply in your lives. So to kind of tell you about our next event, Mike Levesque, tee it up for us, brother. Thank you.
Just simply, wow. And even using the kind of the terms and expressions that some of the young people I get a chance to work with, on my grandmother, that was hot. The spirit and wisdom and perspective of all of our panelists will certainly guide us in profound ways. And Chuck, thank you, brother. You did a fantastic job. It's never easy to manage words between Morehouse men, but you did a wonderful job. And I suspect
he did.
I suspect that you will get much better reviews than Chris and Susan. So you're right back there, young man.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Charles, that's a compliment. That's a compliment. You got to sort through it, but it's a compliment.
So before we go, everybody is invited to stay tuned this week for the rest of the homecoming activities. Our brothers, Joe Carlos and Kennard Garrett and others have been working hard in partnership with our sisters over at Spelman to put together some fantastic events this week. The Morehouse Alumni Association will be back in front of you on this Friday for an incredible lineup that will feature none other than the great Jazzy Jeff. So write this down because we'll be broadcasting from www.morehouseparty.com. Come back, join us for what we are calling the Food is Love Premiere Party. And that event and those events will be brought to you by our friends over at Kroger. It will include entertainment, a sense of community, reunion, and family. So join us again, www.morehouseparty.com, and we'll see you there. Thank you.